The Canon R100 is Canon's newest APS-C mirrorless camera. It eclipses the Canon R10 as the best value underwater camera system in the world at just $479 for the body of the camera. Check out our full review and underwater footage. Hey guys, this is Nirpam from the Underwater Photography Guide and Bluewater Photo. Now today I'm super excited to announce Canon's smallest RF mirrorless camera ever. This is the Canon EOS R100. Now it falls at $480 for the body, which is cheaper than honestly most compact cameras on the market, including the Olympus TG7, and I think it's the most affordable underwater camera system for the best image quality possible that you can get in today's market. Now, I was just saying that last year, about last November, when the Canon R10 came out. Well, I was amazed to see that they came out with something even more affordable, and when I say even more affordable, I mean, honestly, in today's market, I would consider probably starting out with a Canon R100 rather than a compact camera. And that's a big deal to say because this camera has an APS-C sensor. Now, it's not as large as a full frame sensor, but it's large enough to take professional photographs that are much nicer with better detail and better dynamic range than you would from a compact camera and even a micro four thirds camera. So I'm going out on a limb by saying this, but I don't think it makes any sense to really invest in a micro four thirds camera anymore. Olympus cameras and Panasonic cameras have been popular for years for underwater photography, and I think it's really changed where now this makes sense. The Canon R100, Canon R10, Canon R7, the Canon APS-C lineup is just so incredible that I would consider going into this camera instead of going into a compact or micro four thirds. So even taking a first look at this camera, it's easy to see right off the bat what makes it so special. It's under 400 grams, which makes this camera less than a pound. You can see it's tiny in my fingers, and it fits in this Ikelite housing. By the way, this is the only manufacturer that is currently making housing for the R100, but it fits in this tiny dry lock micro housing that makes it not only super easy to use underwater, but also buoyant, unless you have strobes. So if you were to just put this camera inside the housing, take it in the water, it would actually float. And that means that it's going to be really lightweight underwater once you add your strobes, your video lights, and everything else that you need to this system. Then it's going to be nice and almost neutral to the point where I didn't really need to use floats, although you certainly could if you wanted to. Now, I've been shooting with the R100 for the last couple of months while I was doing a photo workshop in the Sea of Cortez, diving in Southern California, and diving here in the Pacific Northwest. It's been awesome to use, and you may be wondering, does that small size affect the battery life? And I would say no, it's actually pretty surprising, but the battery life for this camera is 430 shots when you're using the LCD. So I was able to easily get through a full day of diving, and then I would charge my batteries at the end of the day. Now, the one downside of having a small camera body is that there's only one dial to control your aperture and shutter speed. At first I thought that would be a problem, but it's actually really easy to change your aperture and shutter speed still. All you have to do is press the up button on your camera, and then you can switch between aperture, shutter speed, and use the same dial to change that. So it really wasn't a hindrance in my shooting, and I thought it was pretty cool that even though this is such a compact camera, there's really not many buttons and dials to worry about. It's very easy to use and very ergonomic underwater. But let's talk about what really makes the R100 so special, and that's the image quality. As I said before, for $480, you're getting an APS-C sensor, which gives you 24 megapixels of image quality, which is plenty if you want to crop it when you're shooting macro. It's got incredible dynamic range, especially compared to a micro four thirds camera or a compact camera. And for those of you that don't know what that means, it basically means you get a ton of details in the highlights of your images, in the shadows of your images, and then you can bring that detail out when you're post-processing by dropping the highlights, increasing the shadows, and you can see the full range of detail that you're getting in your image. What that translates to is really nice sunballs with good effects with the light. It translates to very recoverable photos if you happen to underexpose it or overexpose it, and overall it just translates to better detail and sharpness in your photos. Now, the one downside of going with the Canon R100 over Canon's highest end APS-C camera like the Canon R7 is that the Canon R100 doesn't have in-body image stabilization built in, and that's just because the body is too small. Now that said, unless you're taking photos in really dark water, let's say in the Pacific Northwest, where you really need to drop your shutter speed so you can get more green in the background, it really won't affect your photography not having that in-body image stabilization. For the most part, your shutter speeds are going to be high. But even with this camera, I was able to get my shutter speed down to 1/8 of a second. So it just really takes a steady hand, and it takes a knowledgeable diver to work with something that doesn't have in-body image stabilization at those low shutter speeds, which again, most people are not going to do. Now let's move on to what probably everybody is wondering, which is how does a sub $500 camera do when it comes to autofocus? Now I was actually very surprised with how well the R100 did when it came to autofocus. It's not the same as shooting an R10 or an R7, which has Canon's top-of-the-line autofocus system built in with great autofocus tracking. It is one step lower than that. So if you're trying to consider, should I go with the Canon R100 or the R10, the autofocus system is the main difference between the two cameras, and I would consider the Canon R10 for a little bit more money for an incredible autofocus system. But the autofocus system is good on the R100. It performs better than any compact camera. It performs better than any micro four thirds camera. You just need to use it a little bit differently. So I didn't rely on the autofocus tracking system. Even though it was built in with this camera, it was not super great underwater. It just seemed to struggle. But the camera does really well when you use single point autofocus. So I kind of went old school. I used single point autofocus on the camera. I would lock the autofocus with the half pressing the shutter button. It doesn't have back button on this camera. So if you want back button autofocus, then I would consider the R10. But I would lock onto my subject and then I would pan slightly, and it did fine and all my shots were in focus, and it actually acquired pretty quickly. Now finally, you might be wondering, how does the Canon R100 do for underwater video? Overall, I was really pleased with the results when I was shooting video. I thought the white balance was awesome when I was doing manual white balance, and overall it does a great job. It's just important to know that when you're shooting 4K video on the R100, it only goes to 24 frames per second. Now in most situations, I like to shoot at 60 frames per second so I can slow down my footage and make it more stable. You can only do that if you're shooting 1080. So if that's okay with you and you only want to shoot 1080 video, this is probably one of the best cameras for that at this price point. Now if you want something a little bit better, I would consider the R10, because the R10 can do 4K at 60 frames per second. So it can do video, but the R100 is more photographically oriented than video. So let's move on to my favorite underwater lens options for the R100. And you may be thinking, why should I invest in such a cheap camera when I need such expensive lenses? Well, when it comes to underwater photography, your lenses and your lighting are really what matters when it comes to the quality of your photographs. We've already established the 24 megapixel sensor on this camera is excellent. So when you pair them with excellent lenses, you're really not going to notice any differences from your photo and a professional photo taken with some of Canon's higher end cameras. Now, if you're just starting out and you want a really nice, simple, easy to use lens that comes with the camera, we're actually selling the camera, housing, dome port, lens, and zoom gear as a full kit for only $1,650, which is a pretty incredible price for all of that. This kit lens is the 18 to 45. It's a nice mid-range zoom lens, so it's good for portraits of fish, but it also goes out to 18 millimeters, which is great for wide-angle photography, and I was actually using this for wide-angle photography quite often. It works really well with the 6-inch dome port that comes with the package. So I enjoyed shooting it as is, but if you want something a little bit wider, I recommend the Tokina 10 to 17 millimeter fisheye, which also fits behind the same dome port. So all you need for this is a zoom gear, and this lens unfortunately is now discontinued. It's a little bit hard to get. I still highly recommend it, and if you can get it, it's usually fairly inexpensive. So it's a great addition to your camera as well, and it's one of my favorite fisheyes for underwater photography. You can just get excellent details, but you can also zoom in a little bit to get a better field of view. And finally, when it comes to macro photography, there is a Canon 60mm macro that is used on APS-C cameras that works quite well. However, I highly recommend the RF100mm macro. With APS-C cameras in the past, most people didn't really like using these long telephoto lenses with a crop sensor. It just makes it a little bit too hard to take photos. But because the RF100 is the best macro lens in the world, in my opinion, it's the fastest focusing macro lens in the world, in my opinion, it works really well with the R100. I actually preferred it much more than shooting a 60mm. It was able to focus quickly, and unless you're doing blackwater diving, this would be my lens of choice. It does a really fantastic job. Now it is a little bit on the pricey side, but if you're a macro aficionado, you can't get better image quality for the price of the RF100 mixed with the R100. So those are really my 3 lenses of choice for underwater photography. One thing I forgot to mention is that if you are using an EF lens, it works seamlessly with the R100, but you do need this EF to EOS R adapter, which I have on my Tokina right now. And the autofocus will work great. I have no problems with it. It feels like a native lens. So if you need help putting ports together for Canon lenses that you already have that you want to use with the R100, or you need additional recommendations for different situations, then definitely reach out to us at sales@bluewaterphotostore.com, and we'll put together all the ports and everything that you might need. So let's round out this review with a discussion on the Ikelite housing for the R100. As I said, no other manufacturers have come out with housings for the R100. There is a Nauticam housing out for the R50, and then Ikelite also makes housings for the R10, and there's more housing options available for the R7. Now, when it comes to the R100 housing, it's very small, compact, but there's just enough airspace in the housing to make it light, like I said, underwater, and I really like that aspect of it. Now this is going to be one of the smallest underwater camera systems you can expect to shoot underwater. For example, let me show you my full frame system. This is for my Nikon Z6 that I have, and I was setting up today to go diving. This is the difference in size that you're looking at between the full frame Ikelite housing and the Canon R100. So for almost full frame level quality, you definitely don't have to dive with full frame level size, and I'm able to cut off, I think I measured 7 pounds of my actual travel baggage with a full frame camera versus this. Now, the housing itself comes with a sync cord connection, so this is how you fire your strobes. Now, I like sync cord connections. They're super fast. You can shoot 6.5 frames per second because that's what this camera shoots, and that's really fast for capturing action, which I was doing with sea lions in the Sea of Cortez. All you do is you plug in the sync cord connection, and then you can put your camera in the housing. Now, if you don't want to use sync cords and you want to use fiber optics, Ikelite actually offers a fiber optic converter so that you can use fiber optic cables with your current strobes. And we recommend that if you want to use something like the WeFind strobes where you can have a video light. Ooh. But if you're thinking about shooting Ikelite strobes with this system, I would highly recommend using the sync cord with the TTL converter. I used the TTL converter when I was shooting with my Ikelite DS230s, and it does a really excellent job of pretty much giving you automatic strobe exposure. So whatever your settings are in the camera, you don't have to worry about the strobes. It'll come back with the right strobe exposure for your situation, and I found it to be pretty accurate. As I said before, the controls are pretty easy on this housing. Unfortunately, there's not back button autofocus control, so if you're looking for that, I would recommend the R10. But if you're okay with half pressing to focus your camera, you've got your shutter and focus right here. You've got a single dial that will adjust your aperture and shutter speed. Your buttons are all nicely labeled on the back. You just press the up button to change from shutter speed to aperture, and then you use your dial to change those settings. So like I said, it's a very easy way to move around your camera and to shoot fully manual unlike the more expensive TG7. Finally, the vacuum system on the housing does not come with the housing, but I highly recommend it because a vacuum seal will allow you to know if your camera is watertight before you get in the water and not while you're underwater. And that's an extra level of protection, and it does a very good job of making sure that you're going to be okay and not have to worry about a flood while you're diving. So I think that really covers everything you need to know about the Canon EOS R100. This has been one of my favorite cameras to shoot ever, and that's because I really love seeing amazing, beautiful image quality from something that I can afford very easily. If I was just gonna start out right off the bat, I'm a new diver and I'm getting a first underwater camera system, this would be it. And that is why we're gonna have some specials over Black Friday exclusive to Bluewater Photo, so make sure you check out our website, www.bluewaterphotostore.com. If you have any questions at all about this system, make sure you email sales@bluewaterphotostore.com. We can get you set up with all your lenses, your housing, everything that you need, but you can also just check out our packages and it'll have everything you need as well. So if you like our content, make sure you keep following along by subscribing, and if you give us a like, it'll push this video to everybody else out there that needs to know there is an affordable underwater camera option out there. That's very rare that I get to say that, and I'm super stoked about that. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you out there diving.